Moving really quickly here in Ballymena again this evening tonight, Jane. There's a heavy police presence. Officers are under attack again for the third night in a row with bottles, with bricks and with fireworks. Now, police dogs have been deployed to push those crowds back, and we've just seen 2 police water cannons arrive as well. And as you say, we've seen those pictures from Larne Leisure Centre this evening. That's a town about 20 miles away from here. That building has been attacked. Fires were set there, although police tell us they now are under control. Now, it's understood a number of people were moved from Ballymena temporarily to that leisure centre, although we understand they have now left Larne. Now, there have been many calls for calm over the past few days. These don't seem to have been heeded. Here's how things have panned out here in Ballymena over the past 24 hours. 2 nights of intense.
In a rare moment of judicial defiance, the UK Supreme Court has blocked Keir Starmer's attempt to impose harsh penalties on Northern Irish protesters. The ruling came as chaos gripped the streets. Fires burned, riot squads moved in, and ordinary people clashed with police in scenes that looked more like a war zone than a democratic nation. But this wasn't terrorism. It wasn't sectarian violence. It was a direct eruption of public fury.
Hundreds of protesters in Northern Ireland lighting homes on fire, cars on fire. Look at that, fireworks thrown at police in the second night of unrest there. It started after 2 14-year-old Romanian boys were charged in the sexual assault of a teenage girl. The boys are denying the allegations through their lawyer, with this case triggering some violence and anti-immigration sentiment.
At the centre of the storm was a controversial policy quietly introduced by Starmer's government. It would have allowed Northern Irish courts to hand down 10-year prison sentences to those protesting immigration policy. In other words, express concern about how immigration is being handled and risk a decade behind bars. The court called time on that move, declaring it a dangerous overreach. This moment wasn't just about legality. It raised the more fundamental question: who really holds the power in Britain? The government or the people? The flashpoint wasn't London or Belfast. It was Ballymena, a small, quiet town that suddenly became ground zero for nationwide unrest. It started when 2 Romanian teenagers were accused of attempted rape. They denied the charges, but one detail ignited a firestorm. The court required an interpreter. That single fact set off a chain reaction.
The leisure centre has been set on fire in the town of Larne in Northern Ireland this evening after its windows were smashed by people wearing masks. A local MLA said the site had been attacked by thugs. It comes after 2 nights of violence in Ballymena, about 20 miles away. Rioting broke out there on Monday after a protest about an alleged sexual assault in the town. The police service of Northern Ireland had already requested help from other forces in the wake of the violence, which was described as racist thuggery.
Within hours, local protest began. By nightfall, those protests had escalated into full-blown riots. 15 police officers were injured, cars were set ablaze, riot dogs and water cannons were deployed against citizens who hours earlier had simply shown up to voice concern. But instead of listening, the government reacted with force. Rather than address the tension or engage in honest dialogue, the Starmer administration moved to tighten its grip. The proposed law wasn't about protecting people, it was about shutting them up. 10-year sentences for public protest? That's not public order, that's intimidation. And in Ballymena, people made it clear they would not be intimidated. When the smoke cleared, what shocked the public wasn't just the violence, it was how the government chose to respond. Instead of addressing the root causes, concerns about immigration, safety and integration, Labour tried to fast-track a legal measure that would treat protest itself as a crime. 10 years in prison, not for assault, not for destruction of property, but for raising your voice. It was an unmistakable message. Dissent would no longer be tolerated.
Homes destroyed, cars on fire, and 32 police officers injured. Police have described the disorder as racist thuggery and say they're treating the attacks as racially motivated hate crimes. This morning, another clean-up, but the events of the past few days have left their mark. Around these streets, residents are beginning to announce their nationalities. Filipino families are putting stickers on their homes, and there are also lots of union flags with signs saying things like, "This is a British household." Now, off camera, people have told us they hope that will be enough to stop their homes being attacked. Meanwhile, others are packing up and leaving. The family who lived here moved to Northern Ireland from Bulgaria a decade ago, but are now moving out.
Let's not sugarcoat it. This had nothing to do with protecting communities. It was about making an example out of the people who refused to toe the line. Northern Ireland, it seemed, was being used as a test case. If they could get away with it there, what was to stop the same crackdown from reaching Liverpool, Manchester or Birmingham? Thankfully, the courts stepped in. Civil liberties groups, barristers and even voices in the House of Lords warned that the government's actions bore all the signs of authoritarianism. The Supreme Court agreed, calling the punishment grossly disproportionate and defending the right to protest, even when it makes the powerful uncomfortable. Behind the legal drama and street protests is a deeper problem. Britain's immigration system is spinning out of control. In a single day, more than 1,200 migrants crossed the English Channel. Hotels are now packed with asylum seekers. Local schools share fences with migrant hostels. Public services, already stretched thin, are now overwhelmed. And while politicians debate policy in Westminster, regular people are the ones dealing with the consequences. Women are afraid to walk alone at night. Parents are asking tough questions about safety and security near their children's schools. Local clinics are so overbooked that British citizens can't get appointments, but new arrivals often can. When people raise these concerns, they're smeared as racists or branded as extremists. But how did we get to a point where worrying about your daughter's safety makes you a villain? The message seems clear. Stay quiet, don't complain, and accept whatever changes come, no matter how disruptive they are. But clearly, people have had enough. Instead of listening to the public, the government's response was to criminalise resistance. The proposed law would have made it possible to imprison someone for protesting immigration policy longer than some violent offenders serve. It wasn't about public safety, it was about control. Starmer's justification was that such protests could incite racial hatred. But that raises a question no one in power seems eager to answer. If the threat is hate, why is it only ever used to silence the public, not the politicians pushing divisive policies? What happened in Ballymena wasn't isolated. From Oldham to Leeds, a pattern is emerging. People are asking how their own government became more sympathetic to undocumented migrants than to the very communities who elected them. Why are everyday concerns now treated as crimes? It's not just about immigration anymore, it's about the erosion of national identity, the suppression of free speech, and the government's growing discomfort with being questioned. Across the UK, the shift is becoming impossible to ignore. The government now seems quicker to defend migrants who break the law than citizens who speak out. People who protest rising crime or overcrowded services are being labelled as threats, while officials insist that integration is working fine, despite all evidence to the contrary. From Knowsley to Rotherham, residents are seeing the same signs. Police are quicker to shut down a protest than to respond to safety concerns. Women report being followed, but instead of action, they're told to stay indoors. In some towns, families struggling to afford rent walk past hotels filled with undocumented men receiving free accommodation and meals. This isn't compassion, it's collapse. And when people finally reach a breaking point, their protests are met not with empathy, but with surveillance, riot shields and political shaming. The message is chilling: obey or face the consequences. But now the public is no longer staying silent. Thankfully, the attempt to silence the public didn't go unchallenged. The UK's highest court stepped in and ruled the proposed law unconstitutional. 10-year prison terms for protest were thrown out as excessive and dangerous. It was more than a legal decision. It was a warning to the government. The court reminded everyone that peaceful protest is a right, not a privilege granted by politicians. And when those protests target the government itself, that's not extremism. It's democracy in action. Had the court not intervened, Britain would have crossed a line many believed unthinkable, punishing dissent more harshly than assault or theft. But even in the wake of the ruling, the threat hasn't vanished. The government hasn't ruled out bringing the law back under a different name. Some MPs are already discussing emergency powers, typically reserved for terrorism cases. They want to reframe protest as a national security issue, and that should terrify everyone. The Supreme Court's intervention cooled the fire, but it has not extinguished it. Inside Westminster, key figures are already drafting a comeback plan. One proposal on the table would let ministers invoke anti-terror legislation to clamp down on future demonstrations. In plain terms, peaceful protest could be treated like an act of terrorism.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls.
Online, party loyalists cheer the idea. They call for blanket surveillance of right-wing agitators, mass arrests and exclusion zones around migrant centres, turning basic civic engagement into a police matter. If these measures advance, cameras and data mining software will replace dialogue, and dissenting voices will face handcuffs rather than debate. This is no paranoid fantasy. The groundwork is being laid in real time. A government willing to repackage authoritarianism as public safety today will have no trouble justifying deeper intrusions tomorrow. The court drew a line, but Westminster is already looking for ways to step over it. What we're witnessing is a disturbing redefinition of terms. Protesters are no longer viewed as concerned citizens, they're being lumped together with domestic threats. Peaceful marches are being painted as breeding grounds for hate, and anyone who questions the government's immigration stance risks being branded an extremist. The irony is chilling. While the public is told to be tolerant, patient and silent, the state's tolerance is wearing thinner by the day. Authorities are now more interested in monitoring citizens than addressing their complaints. Entire communities are being flagged as problem areas simply because they speak up. Britain has entered a moment where defending your town, your safety and your voice is seen as radical. But if the government truly believed in integration and unity, it wouldn't need to suppress dissent to preserve them. The public isn't fighting for chaos, they're fighting for recognition, for fairness and for a country that still feels like home. This is no longer about isolated protests or one controversial law. What's unfolding is a quiet but deliberate transformation of Britain itself. In the name of progress and inclusion, core values are being eroded. Free speech, public accountability, and national identity, all pushed aside for political convenience. Many feel they're living in a country they no longer recognise. The rules have changed, but no one asked for permission. Traditions that once united communities are being dismissed as outdated. Questioning new policies invites suspicion. Even voicing discomfort can land you on a government watch list. This isn't integration, it's erasure. And while the political class offers carefully scripted reassurances, people on the ground are dealing with real fear, real consequences, and a growing sense of abandonment. The court's ruling may have slowed the damage, but it didn't undo it. The fight now isn't just for legal protections, it's for the soul of the nation. When your own government begins treating you like the threat, something has gone deeply wrong. Concerned parents, retired teachers, small business owners, these are not radicals. Yet many now find themselves on the receiving end of police warnings, online censorship or public shame simply for asking hard questions. And while migrants are framed as victims in political narratives, the people raising concerns are increasingly painted as villains. It's a reversal that leaves citizens feeling voiceless and betrayed. Their taxes fund housing they're not allowed to question. Their communities are reshaped without input, and their rights to speak out slowly chiselled away. This isn't about refusing change, it's about refusing silence. A society cannot thrive when its own citizens are punished for participating. And if the government continues to blur the line between disagreement and criminality, it risks turning its own population into an underground resistance. What's being tested now is more than law. It's the very definition of freedom. Everything that's happened, Ballymena, the riots, the block legislation, the court's intervention, it all leads to one unavoidable truth. Britain is at a turning point. What's at stake isn't just one law or one policy. It's the future of the country's identity, its values, and the relationship between the people and those in power. The Supreme Court may have stopped Starmer's plan for now, but the intent behind it remains clear. This government is willing to criminalise dissent, label protesters as threats, and use emergency powers designed for terrorists on its own citizens. That's not protecting democracy, that's rewriting it. So the real question now isn't about what the courts will do, it's about what the public is willing to accept. Will people sit back while protest is rebranded as hate, while speaking out becomes a punishable act? Or will they draw the line and push back before it's too late? This isn't about politics, it's about principle. And the decision no longer lies in the hands of Parliament or judges. It lies with you. Because if you don't speak now, there may not be another chance to speak at all. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please like and subscribe to the channel for more updates like this.